I want to talk about the basic topic that we're discussing this week is data. So the data fits where into the IPO diagram that we were talking about? Where does the data fit, do you think? In the IPO diagram, where does the data fit? The input and the output. So these are basically, we're getting that tool to be able to figure out what goes in those two columns, okay? And then next week, we'll learn some of the operations, which of course will go in the processing steps, okay? So we're getting the pieces so we can solve using those IPO diagrams. Okay. So this slide right here says variables and constants. I want to get back to constants. So I'm going to swing back to this slide. I'm going to talk about variables first. We did say that the difference between a variable and a constant is what again? What did we say the difference between a variable and a constant is? Tyler? A variable changes. Constant remains the same. So we're going to talk about variables first because they're more general purpose. Okay. Wrong. Okay. So much of this we have already discussed, okay? But let's make sure we understand each of these points. We said that when we declare a variable, what happens? Space is allocated in memory, okay? When we declare a variable, which I'm going to show you how to do today, space is allocated in memory. And every memory location has a number associated with it, and we call that number its address. So every memory location has a number that corresponds to it, and I'm making this up, but we don't want to really worry about the number. So instead, we give the location a name that we can remember instead, a meaningful name. And that's how we name our variables. But when we name a variable and declare it with a type, space is allocated for that variable. There is an address associated with it, but we're going to assign a name to it. Now, the naming convention can vary slightly from language to language. In this particular class, we chose to use the rules of C++, which is actually very similar to Java. So we're going to use alphanumeric characters. We always begin our variables with an alphabetic character. We have no spaces in our variable names. So if we want to have a multiple word variable name, what should we do? If we want to have a multiple word variable, there's a space here, chair here, and chair here. We should have enough for everybody. So, okay, go ahead. Yes? Well, that might be the type, but I'm talking about just the naming it itself. Teresa? Camel case. So when we have multiple names for a variable, such as room width, we start with lowercase, and then any subsequent words are capitalized, and we call this camel case. Okay? You can use any number of characters in a variable name. However, as many as you give it, that's how much you have to type. So you want to use, a reasonably length variable. Okay? So here's an example that uses constants. Let's skip that for a second. This is a payroll problem, because I'm going to go back to constants are a little easier and they're more specific. So I want to talk about variables and then explain constants. So if I decide for a payroll program that I want to specify an employee name, makes sense, right? I want to specify hours worked, and I want to specify a pay rate, then in addition to coming up with the name for each of these variables, I also have to come up with a type. Now, these values are variable because for every employee entered, the name is going to be different, okay? And for every employee, there's going to be a different pay rate and a different hours worked. So they're going to have different values depending upon who enters the values, okay? So these are actually variable declarations. Let's take a look. Let's go back here one second. Okay. So when we declare, I'm going a little crazy here with the order here. When we declare a variable, which is what our goal is today, we're going to do two things. We're going to say type, we're going to say name, and then all of these are followed by a semicolon. So that's how we declare a variable. We declare a variable. I have a eraser. By saying the type of the variable, the name of the variable, followed by a semicolon. Now, typically, we do our declarations where in the program? Where did you notice yesterday that I asked you to put the declarations, Tyler? Most of us do it right at the beginning. Most of us do it right at the beginning, just inside main. Okay? It's more convention than anything else. They do have to be declared before they're used. That's why. Okay. So we have an idea now how name works because we've been using these naming conventions, right? We've been using the camel case. We've been using the lowercase. We said why room width is a better name than width. Height feet is a better name than feet. Okay? So that we are zeroing in on coming up with good names.